Joselyn Adams is a 30-year-old marketing executive who has worked tirelessly to build her career and achieve financial success. However, her devotion to her family, especially to her parents and her sister, has always been taken for granted. Joselyn's life takes a dramatic turn when she uncovers years of manipulation, lies, and financial exploitation by the people she loved most. Faced with a life-changing betrayal, she decides to reclaim her independence and break free from the toxic cycle, taking control of her own destiny. I stood frozen in the middle of Dallas International Airport, my suitcase beside me. My phone was clutched tightly in my hand, the words from my mother ringing in my ears. The bustling airport, with families reuniting and business travelers rushing to catch their flights, felt like a blur as the truth began to settle in. "We're in Honolulu. Why didn't you come to the airport yesterday, sweetie?" My mother's sugary voice through the phone made my stomach turn. I could feel the anger bubbling up from my chest, but I fought to keep my voice steady. "What do you mean yesterday?" I managed to ask, my voice shaking. "You told me the flight was today at 2 p.m. I have the text messages to prove it." I looked around at the people rushing past me, their excitement palpable. But for me, the world had come to a screeching halt. The truth sank in with the slow inevitability of a sinking ship. They had deliberately lied about the flight date. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. They didn't want me on this trip. "Oh, sweetie, there must have been some confusion," my mother said, trying to sound calm, but I could hear the lie in her voice. "Your sister made it just fine. We're all settled in at the resort now." Of course, Amy made it. Amy, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, the one whose every whim was catered to, while I was left to pick up the pieces. I clenched my teeth and took a deep breath, forcing the anger back for a moment. "This wasn't a confusion, Mom," I said, my voice growing stronger. "You deliberately gave me the wrong date. You never wanted me on this trip, did you?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear my mother's breathing, but she didn't say anything right away. "Now, Joselyn, don't be dramatic," she finally said, as if trying to dismiss the situation. "These things happen." I ended the call. My hand was trembling as I held the phone, and I felt a sharp pain in my chest. Betrayal. Around me, families were laughing, hugging, and heading off on their vacations, while I stood alone, betrayed by the people who should have loved me the most. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had been the one to support them financially for years, helping them maintain their lifestyle after my father's early retirement. I had helped pay for everything, medical bills, groceries, and more. And this is how they repaid me? By leaving me behind while still taking my money? I stared at my useless suitcase in the middle of the airport, the tears threatening to spill over. But more than sadness, I felt an intense, burning anger rising inside me. This wasn't just about a missed vacation. This was about years of manipulation, favoritism, and emotional blackmail. I stood there, my heart racing, and in that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. I had always wondered if my parents ever truly saw me as their daughter, or just as their personal bank account. Growing up, everything was always about Amy, her dance recitals, her straight A's, her perfect smile. I was the one who had learned to live in her shadow, never able to earn the same affection and admiration she received so effortlessly. I had worked my whole life for their approval, always striving for recognition. I threw myself into my career, working overtime and weekends, climbing the corporate ladder while Amy pursued her dreams of acting, funded by my parents' retirement savings. Meanwhile, I was building something real. At just 30, I had earned my position as the youngest executive at my marketing firm, managing major client accounts and leading a team of 15 people. But then my father retired early due to his arthritis, and the savings he and my mother had spent on Amy's failed acting career had dwindled. They needed help, and without hesitation, I stepped in. Every month, I sent them $2,000 to cover their mortgage, utilities, and any unexpected medical bills. Last year alone, I gave them over $30,000, money I had planned to use for a down payment on my own house. "We're so blessed to have such a generous daughter," my mom would say during our weekly calls. But those calls always ended the same way. Updates about Amy's latest audition or her new headshots. Never once did they ask about my life, my work, or my well-being, unless they needed something. And that was always the case. 2 months ago, they mentioned planning a family trip to Hawaii. I was thrilled. Finally, I thought, a chance to spend quality time with my family. But they insisted on handling all the arrangements themselves. Don't worry about anything, Jocelyn, they had said. Just focus on your big client meeting. We'll take care of everything. Like a fool, I believed them. I even transferred extra money to their account to help cover the resort expenses. It's the least I can do, I had said, imagining lazy days on the beach, family dinners, and sunsets together. I thought maybe this trip would be different. Maybe for once they would see me as more than just a financial safety net. Instead, here I was, standing in an empty airport, alone with a broken heart. As if the universe was mocking me, my phone buzzed with a new message from Amy. It was a photo of her and my parents at the beach, cocktails in hand. The caption read, "Family vacation begins. Missing you, sis. Wish you could have made it." The rage that filled me in that moment was unlike anything I had ever felt before. I felt a knot of fury tighten in my chest as I stared at the photo. My mind started to race, and I began scrolling through past text messages from my parents. The pattern became crystal clear. Every conversation about the trip had been carefully orchestrated to ensure I would miss it. My mom had texted me, "The flight's at 2 p.m. on the 15th, but I could see on Amy's Instagram story the boarding passes from yesterday, the 14th. They hadn't made a mistake. They had planned this deception down to the last detail. My phone rang again, and this time it was my father. "Joselyn," his voice was stern, like I was a child being scolded. "Your mother is very upset by your attitude. We made an honest mistake with the dates, and now you're turning this into a drama. You're a grown woman. You should understand these things happen." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "An honest mistake?" I said, incredulity rising in my voice. "Then why did Amy know the correct date? Why did you insist on booking everything yourselves? Why have you been lying to me for weeks now?" I heard him take a sharp breath, clearly thrown off by my questions. "Listen here," he began, but I cut him off. "No, Dad, you listen. I just checked my bank statements last week. I sent you $3,000 for this trip. Was that a mistake too? Or did you just take my money knowing you'd leave me behind?" Silence. For a long moment, there was nothing. And then he spoke, his voice softer now, as if he was trying a different approach. "Jocelyn, you know we're on a fixed income. We needed that money for the trip. You're doing so well in your career. You understand making sacrifices for family, don't you?" My hands were shaking so hard that I could barely hold the phone. "Sacrifices for family?" I repeated, the hurt and frustration in my voice unmistakable. "I've been making sacrifices for years. I've given up my savings, my dreams of buying a house, all to support you and Mom. And this is how you repay me. Don't be selfish, Hamanaurisha," he snapped. "Your sister needed this vacation. She's been under so much stress with her acting career." I felt my voice rise, my anger flooding back. "Her acting career? You mean the hobby you've been funding with my money? While she lives rent-free in your house? The auditions that never lead anywhere? While I work 60-hour weeks to support all of you?" That's when he shouted, "Enough!" His voice thundered through the phone. "I won't stand for this disrespect. You've changed, Jocelyn. Money has made you cruel." And in that moment, something inside me snapped. The hurt was still there, but now it was hardening into something far stronger. Resolve. "You're right, Dad," I said, my voice low but firm. "I have changed, and things are about to change even more." I ended the call, and with that, I made the decision to close the bank of Jocelyn, permanently. In the days that followed, I documented everything. Every text message, every bank transfer, every penny I had sent them over the years. The total was staggering, almost $50,000. All the sacrifices I had made for them, all the years I had been manipulated into believing that I owed them. It was time to take back control. I closed my joint account at the bank and called my HR department to remove them as beneficiaries from my life insurance policy. With each step, I felt lighter. It was like breaking free from invisible chains that had bound me for so long. And then the guilt trips began. First, my mother, texting me with sobs about how upset she was. Then Amy, calling me dramatic, selfish. My father's messages grew threatening, warning me about the consequences of abandoning my family. But I didn't respond. I didn't give in. This time, I had drawn the line. One evening, my Aunt Rose visited me at work. She had heard about the fallout with my parents. When she sat down across from me, I expected the usual lecture. But what she said surprised me. What they did was cruel, Joselyn. I've watched them take advantage of your kindness for years. You deserve better than this. Tears welled in my eyes as she squeezed my hand. For the first time in my life, someone in my family saw me. Not as the provider, but as the person I was becoming. Rose was my ally. She helped me gather more evidence and freeze my credit. She warned me to stay strong. The truth was finally out, and it was time to take action. 2 weeks later, Rose called me with the most shocking news yet. My parents had opened a credit card in my name without my knowledge. They had used my social security number to rack up a massive amount of debt. My parents had committed fraud, and it was a crime. They had used my money to support their extravagant lifestyle, and now they had used my identity to secure even more debt. I felt my world crumble around me as the truth sank in. I arranged a confrontation. With Rose's support, I prepared all the evidence. The credit card statements, the gambling debts, the false stories about Amy's acting career. When my parents arrived at Rose's house, they were unprepared for what was coming. Would anyone like to explain this? I asked, pulling out the credit card statements. You committed identity theft. That's a federal crime. The room fell silent, and the chaos that followed was exactly what I had anticipated. My mother collapsed into dramatic sobs, and my father tried to explain away everything. But this time, I wasn't falling for it. No more manipulation, I said firmly. You'll sign this repayment agreement, or I'll press charges. Your choice. My father, now defeated, nodded. My mother, with tears that had dried up quickly, reluctantly signed the documents. Amy, who had been in the dark, looked at me with new eyes filled with the dawning realization of what our parents had done. In the weeks that followed, my parents' facade completely crumbled. They had no more access to my money, and they were forced to sell their house. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it because it was justice. Amy moved in with Rose for a while, and she finally understood the truth. But it wasn't just about them anymore. It was about me reclaiming my life. I booked a trip to Hawaii, not the family vacation I had once hoped for, but one I would take for myself. When I stood on that beach watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, I realized that this was the freedom I had been seeking for years. The freedom they tried to take from me was now mine. Sometimes the happiest endings don't involve forgiveness. Sometimes they're about choosing yourself. And that was exactly what I did. That day I learned the true meaning of freedom, and I would never look back. After I decided to cut off all financial contact with my family, the calls and messages from my mother became more intense. One morning, I woke up to see a missed call from her. Along with it, there was a long message filled with tears. Joselyn, you can't do this to your family. We've done everything for you, and now you're treating me like this? Do you even understand how we have to live? My heart tightened as I read those words, but I didn't hesitate. Every time my mother did this, it was like I was being pulled back into the vicious cycle of manipulation. I sighed, not responding immediately. Instead, I went back to my plan. One day while I was at work, I received a call from an unknown number. I didn't pick up right away, but my stomach clenched when I saw the caller's name. It was my mom's old friend, Linda. She had been a close friend of my mother's and had helped our family for years. I wasn't surprised she was calling, but I wasn't sure what I should do. Joselyn, I heard about what happened between you and your family. You don't want to upset your mother, do you? Linda said, her voice filled with concern. Linda, it's not what you think. My mother lied to me, and I'm just protecting myself, I answered shortly, not wanting to continue the conversation, but Linda was insistent. You need to understand, you're their only child. Now is not the time to confront your mother. You need to think about your family, she emphasized. A new wave of anger rose within me. My family? They never thought of me as a member of the family. They only saw me as a financial tool, a source of support. This wasn't family. This was a trap. Linda, I'm sorry, But I can't continue like this. My family needs to learn a lesson in respect, I responded, then hung up before she had a chance to reply. A few days later, just when I thought things would settle, I received another call. This time it was from someone I never expected to hear from. It was a bank employee, one of the people I had asked to help freeze my accounts. Joselyn, we've detected some suspicious transactions from your family's account. I think you should know, he said, his voice somber. What he said made my blood run cold. My family hadn't just deceived me about spending. They were once again abusing my account. They had tried to open a new credit card in my name without my knowledge. It was blatant fraud. I want all the evidence of these transactions right now, and I will report this to the authorities, I said, determined not to let this slide as it had before. When I met with my lawyer to handle the situation, I couldn't help but feel anxious. Just thinking about facing my family in court, confronting them with the charges, made my heart tighten. But when I looked into my lawyer's eyes, I realized I had no other choice. My family had crossed the line for too long, and it was time for me to fight for myself. After the conversation, I received a message from my mother. We've done everything for you. You're destroying our family. Please think about it, Joselyn. But I didn't reply. Nothing could make me turn back. Not because I didn't love them, but because I loved myself more. And it was time for me to live for myself. In the weeks that followed, my life began to change. I received an unexpected call from Amy. This time her voice was softer, no longer challenging as before. Joselyn, I don't know what to do. They've lied to me for all these years. My feelings at that moment weren't anger, but empathy. Amy, I didn't want things to get this far. But this is the truth. They've used us as pawns in their game, I told her. We need to be strong to face this. Amy didn't say anything, but I could feel a change in her tone. She was beginning to realize the truth I had endured all these years. And that was the first step toward us finding some peace, even if everything had been broken. Finally, on a rainy evening, I received a call from my lawyer. Joselyn, I've received confirmation from the authorities about the unauthorized credit card and identity theft. This is a serious case. Everything started to make sense. My family would have to face serious consequences, and I couldn't stand by and watch them continue making these mistakes. Every step I took, every decision I made, I felt clearer than ever. I was no longer a victim in this story. I was the one in control, and I would never go back. When I walked out of my meeting with my lawyer, I felt something I had never felt before, a power that I hadn't known I had. My hands no longer shook, and my mind was no longer foggy. I didn't have to endure my family's manipulation anymore. I had chosen my own path, a path without their demands, threats, and unreasonable wishes. That day, when I decided to send an official email to my family, informing them that I would no longer provide financial support, it felt like a heavy stone had been lifted from my shoulders. I was the one in charge now. I was no longer a pawn in their game. I didn't have to grit my teeth and endure, afraid to hurt them. I had grown enough to understand that maintaining self-respect was more important than anything else. Right after sending the email, I received a flurry of messages and calls from my mom and dad. My mom cried, accused me of being selfish and not caring about the family. My dad started threatening me, warning me about the consequences if I continued this way. But this time, I didn't feel weak. I didn't feel guilty. There was only one thought in my mind. They had done this to me all these years, and now it was time for me to protect myself. A week later, I got a call from Rose. She called to inform me that my mother had visited her, crying, pleading about how I had abandoned them. But Rose didn't respond as she usually did. Instead, she said something that made me feel relieved. Joselyn, you did the right thing. You finally stood up for yourself. After everything happened, I didn't feel happy seeing my family suffer. They were in a tough situation now, forced to sell their house and move into a small apartment, no longer receiving financial support from me. But deep inside, I knew this was the consequence of their actions. The cost of manipulation and lies was high, and they were finally paying the price. With my decision to choose a new path, I didn't regret it. I started rebuilding my life. Even though I didn't have much contact with my family anymore, I had learned so much. Most importantly, I realized that nothing was more important than loving and protecting myself from toxic relationships. At this point, I started my own projects, investing in plans I had abandoned for so many years. I even began looking for my first house, a place truly for me, not for anyone else. My efforts were no longer shadowed by my family's presence, and I could finally see a brighter future ahead. Though at times I felt lonely, I understood that the freedom I had found was worth so much more. I was no longer bound by the expectations and pressures of my family. I wasn't living for anyone else anymore. I was living for myself. This story serves as a reminder not to let yourself become a victim of manipulation in any relationship. Whether it's family, friends, or partners, if you don't feel respected, you have the right to stand up and protect yourself. Never let yourself become a tool for someone else's gain. Always remember, self-respect and independence are the most valuable qualities. With this story, I want to ask you, have you ever felt manipulated in your relationships? And what did you do to break free from it? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's share our stories and learn to stand up for ourselves.